All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. We are back, and it is Wednesday morning, um, March the 3rd, 2021, and I don't think it's a cold anymore. Yesterday, though, we've been living in Arizona for 10 years, and I haven't had to deal with allergies here at all. My whole life I had terrible allergies, just terrible, like hay fever stuff. But there's no real grass here. But we've lived here for 10 years. I haven't had to deal with allergies, and I think this is allergies. I don't know if you can see my eyes. I can't wear my contacts, but they're just yesterday they were so inflamed. They were so red. I could like it was they were I was it looked all day. Everybody, my family, when they'd see me, they're like, "Are you okay, Dad?" Because it looked like I was crying all day. They were just leaking all day, like red. Anyway, yeah, tears constantly. It was rough. Anyway, yeah, it was rough. It could be worse. I mean, I'm not. But yesterday. I could barely open my eyes in the morning. My eyes were burning so badly. So sorry for yesterday. Let me say good morning. Good morning to my mom. I love you, Mama. Good morning. Good morning to Ron and to Amy. Hey, you guys, and to Jerry and to Janet, and to Erica. Hey, Erica, how you doing? And good morning to Lori in Indianapolis. And everything just slid down on me here. Okay, and there we got Ruti, Boker Tov, Ruti. And Jessica, and good morning to Jessica, and to Jim, and Sarah, and Nicole. Good morning, you guys. To Dayspring in Scotland, good evening there. And to Shalom to Steve, and to Ellen, and Richard. Good morning, you guys. Cher, and Pat, and Lori. Good morning. And we've got Charlene. And who's struggling with the fact that the J.J. Watt football news left the Texans and came here to the Cardinals. So that's a big get by the Cardinals. Sorry, it's falling apart in Houston. Good morning to Sonia and Naum and Sarah. Good morning, you guys, and to John and Wendy and Emma and Sutton. Good morning. All right, let me look over here and let me say good morning. To Kelly Woods and to Melody, and I'll say good morning to Barbara in advance. I know she's probably working today, but good morning to Barbara. And we've got the Eddies. Thank you for your prayers, for everyone, and thank you, Lauren and Levi and Valor and Haven and Everett. And good morning to Kathleen as well. And I'll say good morning to Pastor and Sister Martinez as well. All right, well, we are, and Sonia Valenzuela. Good morning, Sonia and Margarita. Good morning to you as well. All right, well, we're in 1 Peter chapter 4. What I want to do this morning is I want to just do I know that it's been recommended, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to read the full passage this morning, and then go back through it. And this morning's is a bit of a recap for Peter. Peter's recapping a lot, and yet he's not fully recapping. He ends verse 11 of chapter 4 that we were looking at a couple days ago ends with a doxology at the end. A blessing of worship unto the Lord at the end, and he says, whoever speaks, let it be as one speaking the utterances of God. Whoever serves, let it be with the strength that God supplies. So in all things, may God be glorified through Messiah Yeshua. All glory and power to him forever and ever. Amen. And so that feels like a conclusion, but it's not. But it does. We certainly are coming to another section of the letter where he's now beginning the closing of this letter. And he's just been saying, basically, keep your perspective. The end of everything, the fulfillment, the completion of everything is approaching. So live with that perspective in everything that you do. Don't lose sight of that. And he opens and says, loved ones, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal taking place among you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. Instead, rejoice insofar as you share in the sufferings of Messiah, so that the revelation of his glory you may also rejoice and be glad. If you're insulted for the name of Messiah, you are fortunate, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. Let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or evildoer or as a troublemaker. But if anyone suffers for following Messiah, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in this name. For the time has come for judgment to begin with the house of God. If judgment begins with us first, what will be the end for those who disobey the good news of God? Now, if it's hard for the righteous to be saved, what shall become of the ungodly and the sinner? So then, those who suffer according to God's will, let them trust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good. So that kind of gives us the overview today. And again, you see here, he's reiterating a lot of what you're reading here. Doesn't feel particularly new. By the way, sorry if you're getting a glare of the lights off my glasses. My eyes are such that I couldn't wear my contacts today. So, but he's reiterating things that it's not unfamiliar. There are things that he has said. So that's where you get the sense that he's kind of recapping here. And he's been up to this point, challenging them, spurring them on in the midst of their suffering. This is a people, again, who have been, who've suffered loss. They have been uprooted. They have been, they are on the edges of society. If they were in places of prominence wherever they lived, they've lost all that. Many that would have been taken and put into a Roman colony here in what is modern day Turkey, would have lost whatever their inheritance was as they were expelled from Rome. And so he's saying he's dealing with people that are facing real loss. Now, it's not likely, again, it's not likely that they are at this point facing what came with Nero, even though this phrase "fiery ordeal" is used here. This is likely taking place during the reign of Claudius, and they're dealing with other forms of persecution, but not so much to suffering to the point of death at this point, to that full degree. But he's challenging them not to lose sight of their identity, to keep in the forefront of their minds that basically you've been born into a new hope. You've been born into a living hope. You've been born into a new inheritance that'll never perish, spoil, or fade. And in many ways, like he was saying in chapter 2, like, you're a chip off the old block, the living stone. He's the living stone, and you're living stones. He's the cornerstone. You're a chip off the old cornerstone. You're of the same stuff as him. So let's look at him. Since he is a living stone, the cornerstone, and you are a house of living stones being built in relation to, the cornerstone sets the direction of that, sets the foundation of that house, and it sets the direction as to which way that house is going to go. So did he suffer? Like, let's look at him. Little living stones. Did he suffer? Yeah. Did he deserve it? No, of course he didn't deserve it. So he suffered unjustly. When he was suffering and he was walking, he was perfect. He was sinless. When he was suffering, not because of his sin, but because of his righteousness, because he didn't succumb to the demands of humanity. He didn't to what people expected, to people's expectations. He continued to walk out the purposes of God. He suffered for righteousness. Did he, when they insulted him, did he hurl back insults? When they hurt him, did he say, "Okay, I talked about turning the other cheek, but now it's time to rise up"? Is that what he did? No, he showed us, right? He spoke of the kingdom. He taught it in the Sermon on the Mount, and then he lived it. He demonstrated it. And that's who you're supposed to. He didn't just talk about it, he did it, and that's who we're supposed to be. So he's pointing them, keep your eyes on him. Was in his suffering, there was a crushing, right, to the point of his death, to the cross. So was that the conclusion? Was that the end of it? No, there was there was a resurrection. There was hope on the other side of that. And so fix your eyes on him, that even the culmination of his suffering, that wasn't the end, but that was the opening to something new. Was his suffering pointless? Was it fruitless? Did it produce anything? Well, yeah, it did. Did you understand, though, while it was happening, what it was producing? Peter didn't. They all, the strike the shepherd and the sheep scatter. And they scattered. He didn't understand what was happening. But he can see now through the lens of the resurrection that all that suffering was leading to something, was producing something, that the suffering itself was producing something. That was the righteousness of God. And everything about the message of what he's giving us here of suffering is counter intuitive. So, but he's saying, okay, so recognize this is what he called you to. He set the blueprint. It's to this you were called. It's to this that you were invited when he said, follow me. Right? And again, when you look back at the teachings of Yeshua, he didn't play games with people. He didn't tell them it's going to be easy. He said things like, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. They left everything behind to follow him. Now, they may have thought that in the short term there was something they were going to gain that was going to feel tangible, but what he kept telling them was that I'm going to suffer, and Peter would say things like, no, may it never be. Yeah, and he said, no, you don't have in mind the things of God. You have in mind the things of man. And so now, he's been giving this, Peter's been challenging them. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget his example. And so now he comes back at this closing, as the closing of the letter begins. And he addresses them with a tenderness. Kind of like it's a halftime speech though, but it's to spur them on, but he addresses them because they're really, like, their suffering is real. They're human. These are people that are dealing with real loss, with real pain, and they're trying to understand it, to see it through the lens of how can this be? How can I be suffering in the midst of, and am I on, how can this be what God would want or allow? Why is he allowing this? And he reminds them right out of the get-go who you are. Agapitoi, he says, loved ones, beloved, loved ones. Like, know who you are, loved ones. You're his. So there's a tenderness that he addresses them with, a compassion that he addresses them with. Loved ones, don't be surprised. And that word, don't be surprised, is the word xenos. It has to do with something that's foreign or strange, like an outsider. Don't view it as an outsider. Don't be like, oh, that's outside the borders of what our faith is. Don't look at it that way. He says, don't be zenis seste. Don't be like, oh, I'm surprised by this outside thing at the fire, the burning, which is taking place among you to test you. Again, there are those that would suggest that this would be referring to what was happening during the time of Nero, when they were literally lighting believers on fire, and as Roman candles. That kind of horrific thing. That this is prior to that. You'll remember that in multiple places through this, especially in chapter 1, he talked about this. What you're going through is likened to kind of a refining, like a smelting fire. This is a picture that would be that we've seen throughout the scriptures, and so it's the fiery ordeal. More likely has to do with just the idea of the purifying process of that suffering and persecution brings. Remember earlier in the chapter, he said, suffering cleans things up. It puts an end to sin. Like when you're walking out your faith, it really, there's a cleansing that happens in the midst of suffering and persecution. So don't see it as an outside thing, as though something foreign, something xenu, something strange or foreign it was happening to you. So they're facing these day-to-day losses, these day-to-day injuries, these pains in the midst of their daily life that feels like, what's going on? And so what we've seen also throughout First Peter is him continually pointing back to the prophets, beginning in chapter 1, but he's quoted from the prophets, quoted from the scriptures in multiple points. And he's saying this isn't something outside of what we as the people of God go through, right? This isn't something new. That you can see all along that there has been that's part of the deal. That suffering and persecution are part of the deal for those that he points to the prophets who says, boy, they were wondering about the suffering even the suffering of Messiah, and then they realized they were talking about something that was to come, something that they weren't going to experience in their lifetimes. One of the things that we deal with, like we know, right? We know that there's what Peter is saying here. We've read these kinds of passages enough that we recognize that suffering and persecution is part of the deal. But it's so counterintuitive. It's so, why? Why would that be? How could that be? Why would God desire that or allow that? Or why doesn't he, why is suffering part of the deal? I mean, it doesn't seem like a very good recruitment plan, right? It doesn't seem like if you want to grow, I mean, it's evidenced too, by the way, like in our society, it doesn't feel like you're not going to get a massive crowd with that kind of message. If you talk about how about prosperity, and that kind of thing, boy, people, if it means that they can get it all now, boy, they'll run to that. But I mean, and that's sort of natural, right? I mean, who of us where people are like, hey, I'm inviting you to come and suffer, and you're like, hey, I'm busy, so I'd love to join you, but I don't want to. Like, everything in us is resistant to suffering. So what's the deal? And the deal is basically it's basically this, and I see if I can boil it down. I mean, I know we all know this, but like you go back to the very beginning, where God's desire when He created everything, He said, "Boy, it's very good, tov me'od. It's very good." And His first command in the scriptures when He spoke to Adam of all the trees in the garden, His first command was a positive one: eat. So we translate it, you may freely eat. But He says, eat, enjoy. I've come to give you life and life abundantly. But He gave him a choice, and He said, but of this tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you must not partake of that, right? So don't eat of that. But everything else, eat. The day you eat of that, you'll die. So He spoke to them. The day you eat from the knowledge of good and evil, and He put that there. He left it there, but He said, will you trust my word? And when they reached up to take that, when Eve was deceived that, not to go into all, but when she's deceived and the enemy tempts her and says, you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. He doesn't want that, when, of course, they were already like God, created in His likeness. So He lied to them about their identity. He lied to her about her identity, saying she wasn't something that she already was. And rather than trusting what God had said, no, He said, don't eat of it or I'll die. She trusted the word of the liar. And the thing that didn't happen is the Lord didn't dive in front of them. He had given the instruction, but he didn't come running in front and stop them from partaking. He could have, but he didn't. He had given the instruction, and then he gave them the choice. And when they partook of it, they were basically given to the results of that. Okay, if you're not going to... What God has done is he has allowed us to walk within our choices. You know, for instance, when David, or excuse me, not when David, when the people came to Samuel and said, give us a king like the other nations. And the Lord said, okay, they've not rejected you, Samuel, they've rejected me. And he gives them full disclosure about what's coming. And just like he had at the beginning, if you eat of the tree, you will surely die. But she still took of it. And he says, if you have a king, here's what's going to happen. And they're like, give it to us. And he gave them over to what they wanted. He gave them up to what they wanted. Okay, that's what you want. But then there's a consequence that comes. He allows us to taste the fullness of that consequence. And so what you see is that the enemy, God came to give life and life abundantly. And the enemy has come to steal, kill, and destroy. And the way of the world is based on taking and selfishness and me first and my way. And at first, on a very, here's what we all would recognize on a very instinctive level, is that selfishness, while we know it's wrong, it is what we all are to varying degrees. Naturally, we are selfish. So there's something in us that says, I want what I want, and there's the thought that when I get what I want, then I'll be pleased, then I'll be satisfied, then I'll be happy, then I'll be blessed because I'll have what I want. So I want to take what I want because it brings me pleasure, it brings me satisfaction. And there's a short-term gain to that, right? I mean, there's selfishness seems to pay off. It seems to work. And so, but what you see is that when selfishness works itself out in fullness, when selfishness begins, when you first are selfish and it seems, this works, and you continue, and everyone begins to walk in me firstness, in selfishness, then what you have is taking, fighting, stealing, killing, destruction, everything. All destruction in our world, when you boil sin down to what it is, it's taking for me first what I want, when I want, how I want. And to the degree to which it doesn't, to the degree to which sin is completely unconcerned with how it affects another, its level of offense goes higher. The lack of going, how could you take someone's life? Don't you realize they have a mother, they have a father? Don't you realize, what if someone had done this to you? That's out of the picture because they have what I want and I want it, or they've made me angry, they've offended me, so I'm going to I'm going to the extreme of murder. But when you go to those kinds of things, to take what you want without regard for that person, you see sin escalating to, that's where it crescendos in total destruction. And so you have a world that's built on that. Okay? Steal, kill, and destroy. You have kingdoms. Every kingdom is built on that to some level. All right? It naturally, because people walk in their own ways, because it's about me first, my way first. You know, it's about what I want. I don't care about them. They were born in a different place, so I don't care about them. They look different from me. I don't care about them. They're not one of us. And so there's the me first or us first or whatever that ultimately is not what God had originally intended. And so you also look and you say, if you have a kingdom that says, I'm going to take and take and take and take, and then you have a king that comes and says, okay, here's our strategy. If anyone wants to come after me, what he's going to do, that one is going to kill, steal, and destroy. So what we're going to do is we're going to deny ourselves. We're going to take up our cross. Like and then you follow me. Do what I do. And he lays his life down, and in the midst of a world that is operating in that way, it feels like the team that lines up, if two teams line up, they need to fight with the same strategy, right? Both need to, you can't have one just lay down, and you're definitely going to lose. That's a terrible strategy. And yet, so what we do is we say, okay, I want to be on your team, but I want to fight like they fight, because they're going to beat us. They're going to win. I want to fight with their weapons, otherwise it's a total losing battle. And yet he came and he demonstrated something different to us, something that is, again, it's counterintuitive. It's unnatural, it's supernatural. So what you've had, though, over the course of history, is you've had believers, people who say, well, what I want is I want all of it. Like, I want everything this world has to offer and heaven. And I want to take it in the way that I want to take it and get heaven too. And so what you've had is the ways of the world of inflicting suffering, like taken up in the garb of Yeshua, of Jesus, right? From the time of Constantine, when suddenly it became the state religion. Well, now it works. Now we can become the oppressors. Now we can go and we can take. We can say it's our manifest destiny to go and take whatever we want, because we're God's. And he wants us to take in the way that the world takes. So we're not really changing anything. We're by rejecting suffering, by saying, you know what, it's too hard, that's the long way. Like Yeshua was offered the kingdoms of the world if you would just bow to Satan, bow and take it that way. And he didn't. He took the way of the cross. And again, that way in the short run seems like it loses, but what his word tells us is that it wins, that this destruction will destroy itself. But you follow in my way, and I've got you. And though there is short-term loss, there is long-term gain. So if you're suffering, don't suffer for the reasons that you're walking in their ways. If not for murder and not for stealing, for taking, don't suffer for those things. Or he says later on here, for meddling, basically, for getting in. Don't suffer for that. But if you suffer for righteousness, then that's a different deal, because now you're suffering because you are going against the systems of this world with the way of Yeshua, with the way that God originally intended. So what you can know is that you're going to suffer. Ultimately, you will. You say, well, like for instance, you don't really suffer in our nation for saying, not really, by the way. You don't really suffer for saying you're a believer, a Christian, that you follow Jesus. You don't. And really, what people have against us often is that we've lifted up his name in a way that doesn't reflect what we say he's about. Think about why, for instance, as Jewish believers, think about why we don't use words like Christian and Christ and Jesus. Why don't we? Because those words among our people have been really polluted, haven't they? Having been called Christ killers for generations. The word Christ comes with a and But in Greek, the word is Christianos. And it's a word Peter uses in this passage. He goes, if you suffer as Christianos, which is an unusual word in the New Testament, actually. It's only used in a few places. As like little, as Christians, as Christs, little Christs, Messiah, as in his way, as followers of him. But that word has already been diluted. It's been distorted because we've packaged steal, kill, and destroy in the name of Jesus. Throughout generations, it's been packaged in his name. Onward, Christian soldiers, with the cross of Jesus going on before. And they can't hear the message because what we've demonstrated. And I say as a whole, even the word church, what the church as a whole has demonstrated. So we use other language so we can remove the barriers and bring understanding of the gospel. The fact is, we keep trying to to make the kingdom of God come about with the ways of this world, with steal, kill, and destroy, with force, with oppression. When it's deny yourself, lay down your cross, take up your cross, and follow me. So that what you'll have as believers, what we will experience is when we actually walk in, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. That even in societies that are dominated by those who call themselves Jesus followers, by Christians or whatever, those who are walking out the true gospel will suffer persecution, will be mocked, will be scorned, will be ridiculed. We will suffer persecution by those calling themselves Christians. I mean, we've seen it happen, haven't we? I mean, William Tyndale was burned at the stake for translating the Bible into English by people who called themselves Christians, because it threatened their power, because people are still trying to take power rather than surrender power. So Peter here says, and that's the overall. I'm almost done, honestly. I'll just go through these. He says, verse 13, he says instead, and this is what's important, he says, insofar, to the degree, in proportion to is the idea here. Katho. To the degree to which you share, and the word used here is koinonete, right? Which is, we talk about koinonia, fellowship. It's community, it's sharing, in which your fellowship, in which you're sharing, is in your community, is in the sufferings. To the degree to which you share, you have community in the sufferings of Yeshua. To the degree to which that's the case, you're suffering like him, in community with him, rejoice. Rejoice. So that at the unveiling and the revelation, at the apocalypsis, the unveiling of the glory of the unveiling of his glory, that you may rejoice gloriously. Like, hang on, to the degree to which your sufferings are in fellowship with his sufferings. Rejoice. If you're suffering, he says, as a murderer, if you're insulted, verse 14, if you're insulted for the name of Messiah, you're blessed, right? For the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. It says there's a connection with Isaiah 11:2 here, where it says this, where it tells us the Ruach, the Spirit of Adonai, will rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and insight, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. That when you're suffering in fellowship with his sufferings, then the Spirit of the Lord will find refreshing upon you, will rest upon you as the Spirit rested upon him. Paul says in Philippians 3, verses 10 and 11, he says, my aim is to know him and the power of his resurrection, and the sharing, the fellowship, the communion, the koinonian of his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, if somehow I might arrive at the resurrection from the dead. I want to know him wholly, fully, in not just in resurrection power, but in the fellowship of his sufferings, in laying down my life daily. It's so counterintuitive. It starts at home. It starts in your personal relationships. It starts where it hurts the most, where it costs the most, is where it starts. And if you suffer for his name because you're intent on walking like him, that's beautiful. You're blessed. To the degree to which that is, you can rejoice. Because when he is unveiled, when his glory is revealed, you will rejoice gloriously. So you hang on. If you take the shortcut, that way leads to death. There are few who find the way. Yeshua said the way is narrow. The path of righteousness is narrow, and there are few who find it. The road to destruction is broad, and many go that way. It's easy. It says, let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a troublemaker. And that last word has to do with one who kind of meddles, someone who's meddling in the affairs of others, who's factious. And one commentator here says, meddling may be a problem among Peter's readers because it's a peculiar word to end this list with. They're saying, well, don't suffer as a murderer, don't suffer as a thief, don't suffer as an evildoer, not even as someone who's meddling. It says Peter singles out meddling because his readers may not have recognized that at least some of their suffering could be coming from meddling in a way that didn't seem obviously wrong or inappropriate to them. Right? They've gotten off. Don't lose sight of Yeshua. Don't lose sight of walking in his ways. But if anyone suffers for following Messiah, let him not be ashamed. There's nothing to be ashamed of then. If you're humiliated, if you're suffering insults, if people are calling you weak or coward or foolish, whatever they're calling you, for the sake of walking in obedience to Messiah, and you're suffering for his sake, you know what? You don't have to be ashamed of that. Again, you don't have to defend yourself. Just defend the hope that is in you. Keep your eyes fixed on him. I'm going to finish tomorrow with verses 17 through 19 because I want to kind of dig into those a little bit more. But it's really important to recognize that that if we're walking in a way, the whole system of the world is take and take and take and take for yourself and self, and you don't walk in line with that, but you lay down your life, that's going to hurt. That there's going to be suffering. Yeshua said, woe to you when people say all kinds of good things about you and when they praise you and when everything's good because basically then you're in line with the values of this world. Make sure that when you're suffering, it's, again, not because you're fighting as the world fights for the things that you believe in, but you're fighting as Yeshua fights, right? How did he fight? That's how we fight. Seems like a losing proposition, doesn't it? It's not the way the world works. It's not the way the world works. Seems like a definite way to lose everything. Yeah, kind of does. And seems like nonsense. The cross feels like foolishness. No, that doesn't work. You got to fight. Come on, it's ridiculous. I don't know. I just take him at his word. And I have to move from taking him at his word here and here to walking it out. What that looks like. And that can be a scary proposition, except you fix your eyes on him, that there's a resurrection on the other side. That's what we've been invited to, and numbers will dwindle. And that's okay. I don't say that I'm saying It's there are a few who find it, but we still walk the way of Messiah and demonstrate something that doesn't look like the world. God willing, that's what we demonstrate day by day. All right. Well, let me say good morning to anybody that I did miss. Good morning to. Good morning to, and I see here, yeah, Charlene, no doubt I see, yes, Yeshua was the name that he was given, and it means salvation, and there's no other name. But he speaks in every language, so when people say Jesus, that's perfectly fine, because that's English. When people say Gesù in Italian, that's fine, because he knows his name. It's not, his name spoken, I mean, in Greek, the New Testament's written, and it says Jesus, and that's good, that's good. There's no other name under heaven by which men can be saved, but it's about walking in his name. And so what's beautiful is he comes to us in a language we can understand, and he speaks to us in a language we can understand. And what we don't ever want to do is even take his name, whatever language we use it, and distort it by our witness. That's what's important. It's about upholding what his name is, what his name means. The Lord, compassionate, overflowing in love and truth, forgiving iniquity and sin and transgression, yet by no means holding the guilty unpunished. There is none like him. His name is unlike any other name, no matter what language we declare it in. And that's what we have to guard. That's what we have to guard, is the sanctity of what his name is in whatever language we use it. Say good morning. Did I say good morning to Rachel? I'm not sure if I did, but good morning, Rachel. And I think that's everyone, it looks like. All right, well, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.
When others see with earthly eyes just what they want to see, you will see the things that never die. You will know and recognize by simple childlike faith the priceless truth others will deny. When